Welcome back. It occurred to me that I haven't done any top 10s in a while, so I thought I would get back into it by tackling one of the all-time classic rock debate topics. This will be my list of the top 10 greatest rock guitarists of the 1970s. Now, do keep in mind, narrowing this down to 10 is a pretty insane task. I'm sure I'm going to have lots of people in the comments telling me who I left out. And that's great, by the way. I would love to hear all your opinions. But at a certain point, it becomes like a coin flip and there are no wrong answers. By the way, I'm not going to try and rank these, so I'm going to present these players in alphabetical order. All right, let's get into it. That, of course, the cool little harmony guitar part from Whip and Post, played by Duane Allman and bandmate Dickie Betts, who, by the way, is probably just as deserving of being on this list, but in the end, I went with Duane. The influence of Duane Allman and the Allman Brothers on rock and roll is hard to calculate. They more or less invented the genre of Southern rock. Without the Allman Brothers, would there have been a Marshall Tucker Band, a Leonard Skinner? It's hard to say. In addition, Allman is known for his incredible slide guitar playing, which he apparently first learned to do using an empty pill bottle after hearing Taj Mahal's version of Statesboro Blues, for his amazingly inventive improvisations, and for his tone. The guitar tone on Statesboro Blues was once listed in Guitar Player magazine as one of the top 50 tones of all time. Allman was a sought-after session player even before his tenure in the Allman Brothers. In fact, one of his best-known performances to this day is that wailing slide part he contributed to Eric Clapton's Layla. In spite of the fact that he died tragically in a motorcycle accident in October of '71, his brief career into the 1970s more than justifies his presence on this list. Jeff Beck, of course, first came to prominence as a member of that amazing band, the Yardbirds, which somehow produced three of the greatest rock guitarists of all time, Beck himself, as well as Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. But of those three, I've always felt that Beck was the most impressive as a pure guitarist. In spite of that, he's probably the least known of the three. And I think the reason is very simple. He was a musician's musician. Rock stardom didn't seem to be something he was all that interested in. Instead, he explored many different styles, everything from the blues rock of the Yardbirds classics like Train Kept A-Rollin', to Beck's Bolero based on the music of Impressionist composer Maurice Ravel, to jazz rock fusion covering artists like Charles Mingus, to gigs he did later in life playing Les Paul material note for note. I think it was Ritchie Blackmore who once said of Beck, "I don't have those notes on my guitar," and I know exactly what he was talking about. Generally, if you've played guitar for a while, even a great guitarist, you'll listen and know what they're doing, even if you can't do it yourself. But Beck is one of those guys that frequently makes you say, how is he getting that sound? And as luck would have it, the aforementioned Blackmore now makes an appearance, one of my biggest personal influences. He helped pioneer heavy metal guitar with Deep Purple, Also pioneered the neoclassical guitar movement, later championed by people like Yngwie Malmsteen. And let's face it, with Smoke on the Water, he came up with what is almost certainly the most recognizable rock guitar riff of all time, which is truly saying something. But what always attracted me most to Blackmore was the profound attitude of his playing. I can't think of any other way to put it. He's got great chops, but there's also a sort of savage spontaneity about his playing, very improvisational. And when combined with his dark, intense stage presence, I've always had a hard time looking away when he was up there doing his thing. And I think it's criminal that he's often left out of discussions when names like Page and Clapton come up, because he absolutely belongs in that company. David Gilmour is the ultimate example of the less is more philosophy, and he's also a great example of someone who turned a potential liability into an asset. I've read multiple interviews with him where he states that as a young man, he wanted to be a fast and flashy guitar player like some of the people he admired, but he just wasn't able to do it. And in the end, that was probably for the best, because it's often said of Gilmour that he can say more with one note than most players can say with 10. Gilmour is, of course, a great singer as well, and I think that's key. I think he's one of those players that looks at his guitar as an extension of his voice. He even does some scat singing things occasionally on tunes like Wish You Were Here. His use of long, soulful bends and both hand and whammy bar vibrato add to the emotional feel of his playing. Comfortably Numb has not one but two solos that are often listed right up there with things like Stairway to Heaven and Hotel California as greatest rock guitar solos of all time. The longer second solo gets more of the attention, but personally I prefer the shorter first solo that I included in my intro. With Steve Howe, we have the first decidedly prog rock guitarist on our list. He could do so many different things, so I decided to include an acoustic piece for my intro. As Yes fans will know, that was a small part of Starship Trooper from the Yes album. That album also featured a more extended solo acoustic piece called The Clap, also done in that sort of Chet Atkins style, fast, flashy picking, and an alternating bass note pattern. But Howe was just as likely to do more of a classical style thing, breaking out the nylon stringed guitar on Mood for a Day from the Fragile album. But Howe is a master of the electric guitar as well. He tends to favor hollow body Gibsons, which certainly contributes to his unique tone among rock guitarists. A song like Yours Is No Disgrace features some incredibly jazzy sounding runs way beyond the usual pentatonic stuff we get in most rock. But then there's that funky breakdown, very percussive, almost Hendrix-like, featuring trills and a wah pedal. When I was a kid, I used to read Guitar Player magazine religiously, and I was always excited to see the results of their annual Best of Readers poll. They had the usual categories, Best Rock Guitarist, Best Jazz Guitarist, and so on. But they also had a category, Best All Around, and for a few years running in the 70s, Steve Howe took that category every time, which is certainly a tribute to his eclectic brilliance. So in Alex Lifeson, we have another prog rock guitarist, but for me, Lifeson was the most rock of the prog rock guitarists, and I think for that reason, Rush was a band that fans of, say, Blue Oyster Cult or even Kiss might enjoy, whereas they may have been put off a little bit by groups like King Crimson or Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Of all the guitarists in this video, I think Lifeson is the one whose style underwent the greatest metamorphosis over the course of his career. You listen to the first Rush album, he was very much a Les Paul through a hi-watt kind of guy back then, really in your face. And by the time you get to something like Grace Under Pressure in the 80s, it's almost unrecognizable. Over the years, he began to incorporate effects in a big way, chorus, flanger, and many others. As the 80s approached, Rush began to strip things down a bit, shortening the length of their songs, and Lifeson's playing became much more economical as well. No more extended jammy solos, but much more structured and to the point. I think his rhythm guitar style is the element of his playing that's had the most impact. He liked to take simple open chord shapes, say an E or a G, and move them up and down the fretboard. This would create interesting chord voicings with extensions and alterations as the remaining open strings would become new intervals as the chord was moved to different positions. He also liked to replace standard major and minor bar chords with add nines, which creates an interesting ambiguity to the sound. Now, these are things that Lifeson didn't invent, but he certainly made them a huge part of his style and popularized them to a great extent. For me, Brian May is the king of dynamics. Queen's music is filled with drama, and May's guitar playing does much to create it. Moments like We Will Rock You, that long, sustained feedback note that seems to go on forever, culminating in that crashing C power chord that signals the guitar solo. And what about Bohemian Rhapsody as the mock opera part concludes? May enters with a riff that sounds so incredible. It's not nearly as heavy or overdriven as things that, say, Metallica would do, but the juxtaposition with what has come before makes it sound like a thunderbolt from Zeus. Perhaps more than any other player, May is associated with a single guitar, his famed homemade Red Special, built years ago with the help of his father. I'm sure it has a lot to do with his incredibly unique tone. It literally sounds as if he's wringing the notes out of his guitar when he plays. And when he layers those harmonies, it's almost horn-like at times. Probably my biggest influence as a young guy learning guitar. I think Jimmy Page is the prototypical 70s rock guitarist. There's a reason why I used his image on the thumbnail for this video. His playing and his look pretty much set the blueprint for the decade. In spite of the fact that he created some of the most iconic guitar solos of all time, I mean, come on, Stairway to Heaven, anyone? I think his strongest trait might be his songwriting. Think about how many classic rock riffs came from Jimmy Page, and his use of altered tunings allowed him to come up with brilliant chord voicings on things like Kashmir and the Rain Song that are absolutely beautiful. Page's style is a mixture of blues, rock and roll, and folk/Celtic influences. There's plenty of acoustic stuff mixed in with the hard rock on a typical Zeppelin album. He's sometimes accused of being a bit sloppy live, and yeah, you can hear it in certain bootlegs. He had some substance abuse problems, and I think it depends on how impaired he was on any given night. It honestly never bothered me. I don't need my music to be perfect. I just want it to be authentic. And finally, though not exactly guitar related, I want to mention Page's skills as a producer. If you compare the sound of those first two Zeppelin records with most of what else was going on in the late 60s, it's like night and day, particularly in the way he recorded John Bonham's drums. It sounds so contemporary, it's crazy. So now we come to what I suspect might be the most controversial pick on this list. Uli Jon Roth is certainly the least widely known of all the players in this video, but that doesn't change the fact that he is a phenomenal guitarist. Best known for his work with the German hard rock band Scorpions, I've often described Roth as Jimi Hendrix meets Ritchie Blackmore, or Hendrix with better chops. Not to diminish Hendrix, whose work in the 60s certainly influenced every rock guitarist of the 70s. In fact, it seems pretty obvious that Roth worshipped Hendrix, especially in his younger days. He dressed like him, played a cream Strat, used the whammy bar to create dive bomb effects, used the wah pedal heavily, and so on. But you add to that exotic scales like harmonic minor and Phrygian dominant, and an amazingly fluid technique that allowed for blinding speed, and the effect was mind-boggling. Just listen to his work on tunes like Sails of Charon and Catch Your Train. No one was playing like that in the mid-70s. But much like Jeff Beck, Roth didn't seem all that interested in being a rock star, so he quit the Scorpions to go on and pursue his own more esoteric brand of music, which accounts for the fact that many people have never heard of him. But his influence on the later generation of shredder rock guitarists was incalculable. Most people tend to think of Eddie Van Halen as an 80s guitarist, and he certainly was. But don't forget, the first two Van Halen albums came out in 78 and 79, respectively. So he absolutely belongs on this list. I think Eddie was right up there with Hendrix in terms of the huge seismic effect he had on rock guitar. There was pre-Eddie and post-Eddie. It was never quite the same after. And the fact that Van Halen hit the scene at the end of a decade gives us that clear demarcation between 70s rock guitar and 80s rock guitar. In spite of his incredible technique and the fact that he pioneered and popularized so many innovative techniques, Van Halen is not often included in the shredder category, and I think there's a great reason for this. His playing is so soulful, so bluesy, so swingy and spontaneous sounding that he transcends the whole shredder thing. A lot of those guys sound mechanical, but Eddie never does. It was due to Eddie's overwhelming influence that there was a certain period of the 80s where even some of the most innocuous pop tunes on the radio featured a blazing fast guitar solo, using the legato right hand technique or tapped harmonics that Eddie popularized. And it's no surprise that when Michael Jackson wanted a ripping solo for his song Beat It, he went straight to Eddie. But perhaps the greatest tribute to Eddie came from Frank Zappa, an excellent guitarist in his own right. When they were first introduced, he shook Eddie's hand and said, "Thank you for reinventing the electric guitar." That's it for now. I'm looking forward to a great discussion in the comments. Remember, if you're enjoying the videos and aren't subscribed, please do so. And of course, financial contributions are very welcome. Look in the description of the video. Buy me a coffee. PayPal, Venmo, and Zelle are the options. We'll see you soon.